David sat quietly in his large office. The sunlight came softly through the window, but it did not bring warmth to his heart. He looked at the papers on his desk, reports filled with numbers and graphs about his company. The company was his life's work, a small chain of stores that sold everyday things. But lately, things had been bad. Sales were down. Customers were fewer. And employees seemed unhappy. David was the CEO. That meant he was the boss of everything. He made the big decisions. But lately, he felt far away from the real work. He didn't know what was really happening inside his stores. His office was far from the floors where people worked. He wondered if the numbers told the whole story. Maybe there were problems he could not see. That morning, David had made a choice. He wanted to visit one of his stores without telling anyone. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. He wanted to walk among his workers and customers without being noticed. For a long time, he had been only a face on the phone or a name on a letter. Now, he wanted to be a person again, someone who knew what his company really needed. He looked at himself in the mirror before leaving his office. He put on simple clothes, a plain shirt and jeans, and left his expensive watch on the desk. He wanted to look like an ordinary man, not a CEO. His assistant had no idea where he was going. David felt nervous. This was not easy for him. He was used to meetings and presentations, not to working with his hands or talking to strangers. But he knew this was important. If his company was going to survive, he had to understand more than just numbers. He drove to the store closest to his home. It was a small place, one of the oldest in the chain. He parked his car a few blocks away so no one would recognize him. Then, he walked slowly toward the store, trying to see it as a customer would. The store was quiet when he entered. It smelled like clean floors and fresh paint. The shelves were mostly full, but some were empty in places. David noticed small things: a broken light here, a sign that was torn there. These things might seem small, but they told a story. He wondered if the workers were too busy or too tired to fix them. David walked down the aisles. He watched people picking things up and putting them in their baskets. He saw the cashier smile politely at a woman who was buying bread and milk. Everything seemed normal, but David knew normal could hide many problems. Then he saw a man pushing a cleaning cart near the back of the store. The man was older, with gray hair and kind eyes. His name was Ben, and he was the janitor. David had seen him before in reports, but he had never really talked to him. As David passed by, he noticed something strange. Ben was standing in a quiet corner, wiping his eyes with a cloth. He was crying. David stopped. He did not want to scare Ben, so he walked slowly toward him and said, "Are you okay?" Ben looked up quickly, surprised. He wiped his face again and tried to smile. "Yes, I'm fine," he said softly. But David could see that Ben was not fine. His hands shook a little, and his eyes were red. David did not know what to say next. He wanted to help, but he also wanted to respect Ben's space. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The store's bright lights felt too loud in the silence between them. David felt a deep sadness in his heart. This was not the happy workplace he had hoped for. Something was wrong, and it was bigger than he thought. David decided not to push Ben. He stepped back and said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Ben nodded, but he did not speak again. David watched him for a moment before walking away. David spent the next hour in the store, watching and listening quietly. He talked to some customers, asked simple questions, and helped put a few things back on shelves. But his mind kept going back to Ben. Why was the janitor crying? David knew he needed to find out. This was just the beginning. As he left the store, he felt a strange mix of hope and worry. He had seen a part of his company that no report could show. And now, he was ready to learn the truth even if it was hard. David got into his car and looked back at the store. He knew that tomorrow, he would come back. He had to understand more. For Ben. For his workers. For the future of his company. And most of all, for himself. The next morning, David woke up early with a restless feeling in his chest. The image of Ben, the janitor, crying the day before stayed in his mind. He could not stop thinking about it. He knew that being the CEO meant more than just making money and managing the company from behind a desk. It meant understanding the people who made the company work. David made a quick breakfast but found it hard to eat. His thoughts were with the store and with Ben. Should he go back? Should he try to talk to him again? The questions swirled inside him like a storm. By the time he finished, David had made up his mind. He would return to the store not as a boss, but as a fellow human being. He wanted to find out what was really going on. What was causing Ben to cry? David dressed again in plain clothes. He looked in the mirror and took a deep breath. Be kind. Be patient, he told himself. Then he left the house and drove to the store. This time, when David arrived, the store was busier. Customers came in and out, employees moved quickly from one task to another. But David's eyes searched for Ben. He hoped to find him and maybe start a conversation. He spotted Ben near the back, just like yesterday. The janitor was pushing his cart slowly down an aisle, cleaning the floor. But this time, Ben's face did not have tears. It looked tired, but calm. David walked toward him and gently said, "Good morning, Ben." Ben looked up, a little surprised. Then he smiled faintly. "Morning," he said quietly. David tried to smile back. He felt nervous but wanted to be kind. "I'm David," he said simply. "I'm new here." Ben looked confused. "New? Here?" David nodded. "Yes. I just started working here. It's my first day." Ben laughed softly. "Well, welcome. It's not easy work, but we manage." David felt his heart warm. Ben's voice was soft but honest. "Thanks. I hope I can learn from you." Ben shrugged. "I'm just the janitor. But if you need help, ask me." David felt a little more relaxed. He decided to follow Ben around, helping a little with cleaning and talking when there was a chance. They worked side by side for a while. David noticed Ben was careful, cleaning every corner, making sure everything was in order. But David also saw that Ben was moving slower than most people his age. His back seemed sore, and his hands shook sometimes. David asked gently, "Are you okay?" Ben stopped and looked at him. He took a deep breath and said, "It's nothing serious. Just old age catching up." David wanted to believe him but could see there was more. He waited. After a few minutes, Ben said, "You know, I've worked here for almost 10 years. This store is like my second home." David smiled. "That's a long time. You must know a lot about the people here." Ben nodded. "I do. And I see things most don't. The customers, the workers, the small problems that don't get fixed." David listened closely. He was learning more than he had ever learned from reports or meetings. Ben's smile faded a little. "It's not just the work that's hard. It's the worries. I have a daughter, Emma. She's sick, and the hospital bills are more than I can pay. Sometimes, I cry because I don't know how to help her." David's heart sank. He had not expected this. He wanted to say something to comfort Ben, but words felt small. Instead, he put a hand on Ben's shoulder. Ben looked up, surprised, but did not pull away. David said quietly, "I'm sorry you are going through this, Ben." Ben nodded, eyes shining with tears. "Thank you. Sometimes, it feels like no one notices. David looked around the store. He realized that the employees worked hard every day, but many had problems hidden beneath their smiles. Maybe the company had forgotten them. David knew now that his visit was not just about checking the store. It was about people like Ben, people who carried heavy burdens while trying to do their best. As the day went on, David helped more. He carried boxes, talked to customers, and cleaned shelves. He learned the names of other workers and listened to their stories. Some were worried about their jobs. Others were tired from working long hours. David felt a new feeling inside, responsibility not just for the business but for the people who made it run. Before leaving, David spoke to Ben again. "I want to thank you for trusting me today." Ben smiled, this time a little brighter. "You're welcome. I hope things get better." David nodded. "Me too. And I promise I will do my best to help." As David walked out of the store, he felt a mix of sadness and hope. The store was more than just a business. It was a place where real people lived their lives, with struggles and dreams. David knew that tomorrow would be another day of learning. But he was ready. Because sometimes, the truth is hidden in the quiet moments, like a janitor wiping tears behind the shelves. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to see it. David could not stop thinking about Ben and his story. After the day spent in the store, the CEO felt something new inside him, a sense of sadness, but also a strong need to understand more. He wanted to help, but first, he had to know the full truth. That evening, David sat in his small apartment. The city lights outside twinkled, but his mind was busy with questions. How many other workers were struggling? How many people in his company were hiding silent burdens like Ben? The thought made him restless. David decided to visit the store again the next day. This time, he would try to talk more with the workers. He wanted to listen without judgment, to learn their real feelings. The morning came quickly. David dressed simply again, wore a cap low on his head, and entered the store before it opened to the public. The place was quiet and still. The morning light touched the shelves and floors, giving the store a soft glow. Ben was already there, starting his cleaning work. When he saw David, his face brightened just a little. David smiled and said, "Good morning, Ben." "Good morning," Ben replied. "Back again?" David nodded. "I want to know more about this place. About you all." Ben looked at David with surprise, then a small smile. "You're serious?" "I am," David said. "I want to understand what you go through every day." Ben sighed and looked down for a moment. Then he started to speak. "This store is more than just a job to many of us," Ben said softly. "It's where we spend most of our time. We know the customers, the regulars. We try to be friendly, even when things are hard." David listened closely. He saw Ben's eyes fill with a quiet sadness. "But lately, it's been tough," Ben continued. "Money is tight. The company tries to cut costs. Sometimes, it feels like they forget about us." David asked gently, "What do you mean?" Ben looked around and lowered his voice. "Hours get cut. Repairs are delayed. Some of us work extra, but no one pays for that. And when you're worried about bills at home, it makes everything heavier." David felt a deep ache in his chest. He thought about his own worries as a CEO, and then about the workers who worried about rent, food, and health. Ben paused and then said, "I'm lucky to have Emma. She's my daughter. But her sickness is a weight on my heart. I work long hours to pay for her medicines, but sometimes, it's not enough." David's throat tightened. He wanted to do something, but words escaped him. Ben looked at David, his eyes honest. "I don't want pity. I just want someone to listen." David nodded. "I'm listening, Ben. And I want to help." Ben smiled weakly. Thank you. David spent the day walking the store with Ben and other workers. He talked to Maria, who worked at the cash register and worried about her two children. He spoke to Tom, who stocked shelves and was saving money to go back to school. Each person had a story. Each story was a piece of the bigger picture. David realized the company was more than a business. It was a community, with hopes and fears, joys and struggles. As the day ended, David felt a quiet determination grow inside him. He needed to find a way to make things better, not just for Ben, but for everyone. He promised himself that he would not forget these faces and stories. They were real, and they mattered. That night, David wrote down what he had learned. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. Because sometimes, the hardest truth is not in the numbers, but in the silent burdens people carry every day. And sometimes, the first step to change is simply to listen. David returned to the store the next morning with a quiet hope in his heart. He had learned much from Ben and the other workers, but he knew there was more beneath the surface. The sadness he saw in Ben's eyes had not disappeared, and he wanted to understand the full story. As he entered the store, David noticed the familiar faces of the employees. Maria smiled briefly as she scanned a customer's items, but there was a tiredness behind her eyes. Tom stacked boxes quickly but seemed distracted. The store was alive with activity, yet David felt a heaviness in the air. He found Ben near the back, quietly cleaning the floor. David approached him and said, "Can we talk?" Ben nodded. "Of course." They moved to a quiet corner. David sat down on an empty crate and waited for Ben to speak. After a moment, Ben looked up and said softly, "I've been hiding a lot behind my smile." David listened carefully. "I work hard every day, but sometimes it feels like no one sees the struggle," Ben said. "The bills keep coming, and I worry about Emma every night. She needs medicine and care, and I don't have enough money." David's heart ached. "Have you told anyone at work?" Ben shook his head. "I don't want to be a burden. People have their own problems. I just keep going, hoping things will get better." David thought about how many people might feel the same way. How many workers put on a brave face while their hearts were heavy. He asked gently, "What would help you most right now?" Ben looked down, then back at David. "Knowing that someone cares. That I'm not alone. Maybe a little support to help with the costs for Emma." David nodded. He wanted to do more than just listen. He wanted to find a way to help. Later that day, David stayed after closing time. He walked through the empty aisles, thinking deeply. The store was quiet, but his mind was loud with ideas and worries. He pulled out his phone and began writing a list. He thought about ways to improve the working conditions, to support the employees, and to fix the small problems around the store. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There were budgets to consider and tough decisions ahead. But the people he had met deserved more than empty promises. The next morning, David invited the store manager, Lisa, for a private talk. Lisa had been with the company for years and knew the workers well. David shared what he had learned from Ben and the others. He spoke about the hidden struggles and the need for change. Lisa nodded slowly. "I've seen some of it, but it's hard to make changes without support from the top." David smiled. "That's why I'm here. I want to be that support." Together, they made a plan. They would start small, fixing broken lights, repairing signs, and making sure workers had enough hours. They would create a fund to help employees with emergencies, like Ben's situation. David felt a lightness he had not felt in a long time. For the first time, he believed things could change. As he left the store that evening, he saw Ben locking up. Their eyes met, and Ben gave a small, grateful smile. David knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start. Sometimes, behind every smile, there is a story waiting to be told. And sometimes, All it takes is one person willing to listen and care. David could no longer ignore what he had seen and heard in the store. The stories from Ben, Maria, Tom, and others were not just small problems, they were signs of deeper trouble. If he wanted the company to survive and grow, he needed to face the truth head-on. The next day, David returned to his office, but this time he did not sit quietly behind his desk. Instead, he opened the company's files, reports, and financial papers with a new purpose. He wanted to understand every detail, not just numbers but the real reasons behind the struggles. As he read through the reports, David found some troubling facts. The company had been cutting costs for a long time. Repairs were delayed. Staff hours were reduced to save money. Many workers were working extra hours but were not paid fairly for overtime. Employee benefits had been reduced. And, worst of all, morale was very low. David felt a wave of guilt wash over him. As CEO, he had been responsible for these decisions. He had focused on profits and ignored the people who made the company run. The janitor's tears, Maria's tired smile, and Tom's distracted work were now clearer to him. They were symptoms of this neglect. David knew he had to act fast. He picked up the phone and called Lisa, the store manager. "We need to meet," he said firmly. They met in the conference room that afternoon. David shared what he had learned from the reports and from his time at the store. Lisa nodded. "It's true. We have been struggling. But the hardest part is watching the workers lose hope." David agreed. "I don't want to lose them. I want to fix this." Together, they made a list of urgent problems to address: repair the broken lights and signs that made the store look uncared for. Adjust the staff schedules so no one had to work unfair hours. Create a small emergency fund to help employees facing hard times, like Ben. Start regular meetings where employees could share their ideas and worries. Improve communication between management and workers. David felt a mix of worry and determination. These changes would cost money, but he knew it was necessary. He also realized he needed to visit other stores to understand if these problems were happening elsewhere. In the following weeks, David spent many days visiting different stores. He dressed simply, talked to employees, and listened to their stories. Everywhere he went, he found similar struggles: people working hard but feeling unseen and unheard. One afternoon, at a store in a different city, David met Sarah, a cashier with a gentle smile but tired eyes. Sarah told him about her worries. She was saving money to send her younger brother to school but was afraid she wouldn't make enough. David listened and promised, "We will do better. You all deserve support." Back at headquarters, David worked closely with Lisa and the team to put the changes into action. They repaired broken equipment, adjusted work hours, and set up the emergency fund. They began holding regular meetings where employees could speak openly. Slowly, the atmosphere in the stores started to change. Employees began to smile more. They felt safer to share their ideas and concerns. David could see the difference in their eyes: a little more hope, a little more trust. One evening, David returned to the first store. He found Ben near the entrance, waiting to lock up. Ben looked at David and said, "Thank you for caring." David smiled. "Thank you for being honest. We're just getting started." Ben nodded. "I believe things can get better now." David knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges and setbacks. But he was ready to face them. Because sometimes, the truth is hard to hear. But facing it is the first step to making things right. And sometimes, the real strength of a leader is shown not by numbers or power, but by the courage to change. The changes David and Lisa started to make were slow but steady. The emergency fund helped workers like Ben pay for urgent needs, and fixing the store made the place feel more welcoming. Yet, David knew the real test was still ahead. It was one thing to fix the stores, but another to rebuild trust. One afternoon, David decided to hold a special meeting at the first store. He wanted to meet all the employees and hear from them directly. He sent a simple message to Lisa and the team: "Let's gather and talk openly. I want to listen." On the day of the meeting, the store was quiet after closing time. The workers gathered in the small break room, curious and a little nervous. David stood before them in simple clothes, not as a distant CEO, but as one of them. He began by saying, "Thank you all for coming. I know I haven't always been the leader you needed. But I want to change that. I want to hear from you what is working, what is not, and what we can do better." One by one, the workers spoke. Maria talked about the difficulty of balancing work and family. Tom shared his hopes of going back to school. Ben spoke quietly about his daughter and the weight he carried every day. David listened carefully. He didn't interrupt or judge. He took notes, nodding in understanding. Then, something unexpected happened. A young worker named Amir, who rarely spoke, raised his hand. "I want to say something," he said softly. The room fell silent. Amir explained, "Sometimes, we feel invisible. Like we don't matter. But today, you're here, listening. That means a lot." David felt a warmth in his chest. "You do matter," he said. "All of you matter." The meeting ended with smiles and a new sense of hope. David realized that this was more than a company, it was a family. In the days that followed, David worked to make sure the promises made were kept. He stayed in touch with Lisa and the managers. He made regular visits to the stores. Slowly, the culture began to shift. Customers noticed the change too. The stores felt friendlier and more welcoming. Sales began to improve. But more importantly, the workers were happier. One evening, after a long day, David stopped by the first store again. Ben was there, finishing his cleaning. Ben looked up and said, "I wanted to thank you. Not just for the money or the repairs, but for listening. That means more than you know." David smiled. "I'm glad. But it's not just me. It's all of us, working together." Ben nodded. "I believe this place can be better. Not just for the company, but for all of us." David felt a deep satisfaction. The journey was far from over, but the turning point had come. As he drove home that night, David thought about the path ahead. There would be challenges, but he was ready. Because he had learned the true meaning of leadership. It was not about titles or profits. It was about people. Months had passed since David first walked into the store, unaware of the tears behind the janitor's smile. What began as a simple visit had grown into a journey of change for the company, the workers, and for David himself. That morning, David arrived at the store earlier than usual. The sun was just rising, casting a soft light over the quiet streets. He took a deep breath, feeling a calm hope inside. As he stepped inside, the store looked brighter, cleaner, and more alive. The repaired lights glowed warmly. The shelves were full. And the workers moved with a steady energy that told of pride and care. David spotted Ben near the back, sweeping the floor. Their eyes met, and Ben smiled a real, easy smile. No longer hiding sadness, but carrying strength. "Good morning, Ben," David said. "Good morning, David," Ben replied. "How are you today?" "Better," David answered. "Thanks to you and everyone here." David made his way through the aisles, greeting workers by name. Maria was at the register, chatting quietly with a customer. Tom stocked shelves, his face bright with purpose. Amir organized boxes in the back, smiling as he worked. Each person seemed different, not just happier, but more confident. David thought back to the first days, when he was a stranger in the store, watching Ben cry quietly. Now, he was part of something bigger, a team working together, supporting each other. Later that day, David and Lisa met to review the progress. The emergency fund had helped many workers, allowing them to face challenges without fear. The new schedules gave employees more balance. Regular meetings continued, creating a space for honest talk. "We've come far," Lisa said with a smile. "But there's still work to do." David nodded. "This is only the beginning. We'll keep listening, learning, and growing." That evening, David visited Ben's small home. He wanted to see how the help had made a difference. Ben welcomed him warmly. The house was modest but filled with love. On a small table, a photo of Emma smiled back at them. Ben said softly, "Thanks to the support, Emma's health has improved. I can pay for her medicine now, without worry." David felt a tear in his eye. "That's wonderful, Ben." Ben smiled. "You gave me hope. And with hope, we can face anything." As David left the house, he looked up at the stars shining in the night sky. He felt grateful for the lessons learned, for the people who had trusted him, and for the chance to make a difference. He understood now that true leadership was not about power or titles. It was about kindness, courage, and connection. The store was no longer just a place of business. It was a place of hope, of healing, of new beginnings. And David knew that the story of tears and truth, of struggle and strength was only one of many waiting to be told. Because sometimes, when a leader chooses to listen, a whole world can change.